Hello and welcome to Getting Started with Affinity Photo 2, a course of free tutorials, hints and tips on this excellent photo editing software. Most cameras allow you the option to save photos in both RAW and JPEG formats. But why is this? The saved JPEG has actually been edited by the camera, but you have lost all control of this edit. It has given us good results. However, we have lost detail in the very bright and the very dark areas of this photo. In comparison, the raw image looks quite dull. This is because it has not been processed. If we compare the file sizes, we will see that a JPEG is much smaller than the RAW file. To achieve this smaller size, the JPEG has discarded a large amount of information. The RAW file allows you to work with this lost information to achieve best results. We're going to take this raw image and transform it into this, just using raw editing. We have opened our Affinity Photo software and we are automatically taken to the photo persona. Watch what happens though when we open a raw file. We'll do this under File, Open, find the image that we want, and click it to open. You will now see that the software has taken us out of the photo persona and moved us to the develop persona. This is where we develop raw images. You will see that the context toolbar looks similar with information about the file. You will see that we have some studio panels, but these studio panels are now different. The top set of panels relate to information about the image and information and metadata about how the image was taken, even down to what focusing point was used. In the middle studio panel, we have a number of editing options, including basic processing. We can even look at the lens detail, and if we wish, we can correct any aberrations with the lens or even produce unnatural results. We can look at sharpening and noise reduction. It is even possible to add noise if you wish. We can look at editing tones using curves and black and white adjustments, and we can look at overlays. We will talk more about overlays later in this tutorial. In the bottom studio panel, we have, as before, the navigator and history. If we go to the left-hand tool panel, we will see we have a much smaller choice of tools. These allow us to make some basic adjustments and also include the overlay tools, which we'll talk about again. We can crop the image and we can even change the white balance using the tool panel. When I work on a raw image, I do like to look at the histogram. So if you go to the histogram in the studio panel, we can see this histogram is very much to the left. This means that there is a lot of dark information, but not very much information on the white side. This tends to suggest that it is underexposed. The ideal histogram would be evenly balanced across the whole graph with a smooth peak in the middle. We will start with our basic adjustments, and whilst we're doing this, we will watch the changes that take place in the histogram. If we increase the exposure, you can see the image becomes brighter, and you can see the histogram is moving to the right. If we take this all the way until it is evenly balanced, however, we can now see that the image does look too bright. At the end of the day, it is very much a case of balancing up these adjustments to get the best result that you would like. We will take the exposure back down a little bit, and now the image looks more natural and better exposed. I like to set a black point. If we increase this, you will see that the blacks are getting blacker, but we will also reach a certain point where these blue marks appear. These blue marks appear because we have lost information in the black areas. They are clipped. If we look at the top toolbar, we can see these three icons. One will show clipped highlights, clipped shadows, and clipped tones, and they will show up as the relevant colors. If we switch this off, we can see the blue disappears, but we've lost the information in the black. By keeping this on, we can see the areas of the image that need more work. So we take the black point back until we just lose the blue clipping, and this means we have got information in these areas. We'll adjust the brightness level to see if this takes the histogram any further to the right without becoming overexposed. You can see that it is moving slowly to the right and becoming flatter and more even as well. In my opinion, we've now got a good result without any degree of overexposure. If we look at before and after, the change is quite dramatic, and we are a long way towards producing the desired results. The next panel down allows us to enhance certain aspects of the image. We can use a contrast slider. Most images benefit from added contrast, but you can see as we do that, the blue parts reappear because we are once again losing information in the black area. In this case, we will accept a certain degree of this because there are further changes we will make as we go along that will adjust this. We can now use the clarity slider to help improve the sharpness of the photo. If we overdo this, it can look unnatural, so we will use the slider to get the result that we feel is best for this particular photo. We can work on the saturation of the colors within the photo. This is very much personal choice and depends on the results that you are looking to achieve. In this case, we are making a small increase to the saturation. We can also use the vibrance slider to make some of the colors more vibrant. Once again, it is personal choice. As before, we will look at before and after. And I'm sure you'll agree this is a much better photo. We come to white balance. This can make an image appear slightly warmer or slightly colder, depending on whether we increase the yellow or increase the blue. With this photo, we're going to make a very small increase to the yellow, increasing the warmth. The tint slider shows us the degree of magenta or green in the photo, and as before, we will move this until we're happy with the result. When editing, there's no right or wrong. It is entirely down to the result that you are looking to achieve. You will probably have noticed that the blue clipped shadows disappeared when we adjusted the saturation of the colours. But there's still little detail in these black areas. If we use a slider, we can increase or decrease the amount of detail in the black areas by using the shadow slider. In this case, I'm actually quite happy to leave some of these areas quite dark because this is in the background and I want most of my focus to be on the flowers in the foreground. Similarly, the highlights slider will work on the bright areas of the image. Before and after. I could leave it like this, but actually I am going to leave the background quite dark to take my attention to the foreground. As before, this is all done to the photographer's taste. You are in full control of the results. Under profiles, we can see that we have the color profile in the sRGB profile, which is standard for most cameras. This can be changed if you wish, but we will not do that in this case. We don't need to make any lens aberration adjustments here. Under details, it would be possible to add some sharpness or to reduce or add noise. But I nearly always prefer to do this in the next stage of editing. If we go to tones, we can use curves to work on the contrast. Most images will be improved by what is called a small S-curve. By making adjustments to the curve, we increase the contrast in the image. In many cases, this can be left to the next stage of processing. We can also make a black and white adjustment. As you can see, as soon as we do that, some areas are showing clipped highlights. But of course, this photo really relies on being a color photo, so we won't make any changes concerning black and white. If we go back to our original image and compare it to what we have now, we can see dramatic changes, which I do very much like. We're now going to crop the image to remove some unwanted areas. By pulling the bottom up, we can remove that bright stalk of plant in the bottom right hand corner, and we will take a little bit off the top as well. We pull the edges to where we want, and then by hitting the return button, we've cropped this. But it is always possible to go back on the history and change this if we wish. I will now take some time to assess the changes that we have made and decide whether we are finished yet. You will see there are some bright areas towards the edges of the photo. Bright areas at the edges do tend to draw your eye away from the main subject. This is where the overlay tool becomes useful. If we press on the overlay tool in the tool panel on the left hand side, we'll get a brush We can adjust that brush and size, and quite simply we paint over the edges that we want to edit further. By doing this, we only edit small areas. If we edit the whole image to make these areas darker, then it would also darken everything else. So let's paint over the areas that we want to change. We can be very selective and we can be as accurate as we want. For demonstration purposes, I'm doing this quite quickly. These red marks are temporary. All it is doing is outlining the areas that will be changed by further editing. Now, if we decrease the exposure to these areas, you can see it is only these areas that become darker and the rest of the image is unchanged. We've introduced an overlay which allows us to selectively edit parts of the image. It is possible to create several overlays to create several different changes. Before, after. We'll see it better if we go back on the history. Before and after. And our eyes are no longer drawn to the edges and corners of the photo. We've removed a lot of distraction. If we look at the overlays panel, we can see that we now have a master overlay and a brush overlay. These can be renamed if you wish. It is possible to go back to these overlays at any time and create more changes affecting either the whole image or just the selected areas. We go back to the very beginning. This is our starting image, and this is what we have now. The final part of this will now be to develop this raw image and take it into the photo persona for further editing. We do this by clicking on the Develop button. But before we do this, there's one last thing we're going to consider. If we go back to the View tool, we will see on the context toolbar that we have an output box with a choice of pixel layer, raw layer embedded, and raw layer linked. If we use pixel layer output, we cannot return to this developed persona and adjust any further. By using raw layer, we can make further adjustments at any time in the editing process. On paper, the embedded option is best, but it produces an absolutely massive file size, and this may be limiting depending on your storage capabilities. So I will usually output as a linked raw layer. I can still return in the future to make further changes. After output, we have returned to the photo persona, and we can continue to edit this photo using adjustments and filters. In conclusion, editing a raw file gives us full control over the end results of our photo. This is our starting point and now our finished item. The more raw edits that you do, the better you become at it as you familiarize yourself. Thank you for joining me today on Affinity Photo Getting Started tutorial course. I look forward to meeting you again in the next tutorial.